Thank you very much, Chair, and also thank you for inviting me to be here today to talk you through some of the, let me call it maybe a window on recognition, mobility, and lifelong learning globally. Maybe I should start by, with a hands up here. I am not a credential evaluator. I don't work for a university admissions office. I don't work for, I've never worked for an agency responsible for recognition. So what I can do, all I can really do is provide some reflections, if you like, from the other side, from the floor of being involved largely in recognition and mobility, and therefore by extension lifelong learning, via the UNESCO recognition conventions. We heard already this morning from our introductory remarks about the Global Convention and the Lisbon Convention. And what I plan to share with you today is some data, and I will come back to the reliability of that data later, but also really, which is really only anecdotal experiences I have had in my dealings with, via UNESCO, with the regional conventions, which means also not only the Lisbon Convention, but the other 4 regional conventions and the local, and the recent global convention. So I'm no expert. The data is not mine. The data is UNESCO Institute for Statistics, and the anecdotes are purely that. And if you quote me, I'll deny it. Now, just to clear up something, when I prepared this abstract and title for this address, by the way, this is not a keynote. This is a discussion launch, if you like. I remember it was either Claudia or Louisa wrote to me and said, well, parallax, I've heard of parallax. That's a scientific thing, isn't it? And I thought, well, yeah, it is really. So when I talk about the parallax of mobility and recognition, there are 3 places for this. One is if you're a scientist in the room. If you're a physicist, my sincere apologies. That's you there. I am not a physicist, as somebody asked me earlier this afternoon, and so I look at it in the middle. I'm looking at how a parallax is, how you look at things from different perspectives. And for the geeks or the nerds in the room, this is a Marvel Comics villain called Parallax. And I think you know who you are. I didn't plan to use a PowerPoint presentation at all, but then when I was thinking about all the different statistics and data on mobility, it just made more sense to put some of this data together on a PowerPoint. So forgive me for this. We have stats. So you can see approximately 235 million students currently enrolled in education. Around 6 million we understand to be international students. Of that, about 50% of that 6 million or so are studying outside of their region. But this data is so difficult to be verified or accurate. We just don't know. From UNESCO's point of view, we ask member states to provide the data. Sometimes they report, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they know what they're reporting, sometimes they don't know what they're reporting. And in many instances, this information doesn't even take into account students who may be enrolled on a program online. or online internationally? We just don't know. So these numbers are, to a certain extent, as reliable as we can make them, or as we can assume them to be. But as you will see, some of the data that I will show you later doesn't even add up to this, because we just don't know. This is a graphic presentation of total enrollment of students. And don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with loads of stats in the next 10 minutes, but 2008 to 2018, you can see the changes. You can see this is the global kind of understanding of what we have in terms of enrollment. What's interesting is, of course, the changes, and well, this is 2018, 5 years ago, so it's still not really that up to date, but I think the trends are there. That you can see the increases worldwide are 36%, but more importantly, places such as, or regions, because within UNESCO we talk about 5 regions. Latin America and the Caribbean up 39%, Africa up 50%, Asia up 64%. So this is the global enrollment in students. Again, I recall, we don't know if this includes those who are enrolled online programs. We're not getting that data. I said around about in the slides, 2 slides before, about 6.5 million students internationally mobile, studying internationally. As you can see, 5.4, these are very precise figures. I can't even remember where I found these from. Like 402, what happened to number 403? But anyway, but you can see the trends here. North America 1.2, Europe 2.2, Asia 1.2, etc. And Africa, where I am right now, to very, very low figures. And I'll come back to these, but I don't know, I wouldn't quote these numbers as being accurate, but I think the trends are there. I think you can probably estimate that it is currently like that. Again, I don't really want to spend my time talking about UNESCO conventions, but I just thought it might be interesting to have a quick snapshot background check on UNESCO's recognition conventions. We now have, you're all familiar with the Lisbon Convention, which is 97. We also now have new, revised, updated conventions for the other 4 regions of UNESCO, which are, we have Lisbon Convention, which is Europe and North America. That includes Canada, US, and Israel. We have the Tokyo Convention, Asia Pacific, Addis Convention for Africa, Buenos Aires Convention, Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Arab States Convention for our Arab region. They've all been updated, and the latest being the Arab States Convention. What's quite confusing in some respects is why we would have 5 regional conventions and then we have a global convention. Again, this is not the space to talk about that, but it's historical. It wasn't perceived back in the 70s that we would have a global convention. It took 40 years for that to come to fruition. We now have one for various reasons which I won't go into, but there really wasn't an appetite for mobility in the 1970s when the original conventions, these are updated. There really wasn't an appetite for that. They didn't, member states of UNESCO, we have 194 now, we're not interested. No, mobility only happens within our regions or neighboring countries. It doesn't happen globally. But of course that's all changed. So hence we were able to convince member states to go for and adopt a global convention, which was adopted in 2019. It entered into force, as Dr. Peter from the ministry said, earlier this year, March, I believe it was, and now these are the states parties to the global convention. Again, this is not a discussion on conventions, but the difference is that the regional conventions support mobility, recognition, lifelong learning within the 5 regions, whereas the global convention supports recognition, mobility, and lifelong learning between all of the regions. So hence it's global. Probably not of interest, but this scenario is unique in the whole of the UN system of treaties. Normally, all UN treaties are global by definition. We have now 5 regional conventions and 1 global convention. I would like to hope that down the road, not so far in the future, that the regional conventions become obsolete and we all think in a global cooperation terms in terms of international mobility, recognition, and lifelong learning. But that's, I shall be living in the Caribbean on a boat when that happens. I wanted to talk about the recognition beyond Bologna borders. I think that was what I proposed. So I don't really want to dwell too much on the European space or European North America because that is one region, but I just thought it might be interesting to share again. Now, this is anecdotal, so you're going to either appreciate this or hate me for it. But I know that, of course, the European higher education area, the Bologna process, is unprecedented in terms of the mobility within the European space. EHEA, Lisbon Convention, of course, is 54 countries. European higher education area, I believe, is 45. So, but it's within the European space. It's been an absolute remarkable success in terms of the opportunities for students and faculty and teachers to be mobile within Europe. I suppose the Lisbon Agenda from '97 helped that. The Lisbon Convention, Lisbon Agenda was 97, Lisbon Convention. Of course, let's not forget the Erasmus program. It's all to do with money in the end. I was, well, you can say how old I am. I was in the first cohort of of Erasmus students in 1988. Was it 88 or 87? I think it was 88. But I think that has absolutely been a crucial factor in the success of mobility in Europe. It's also, with the Lisbon Convention and the Lisbon Agenda, spurned a culture of recognition and a culture of understanding of different types of qualifications within the European space, particularly the Bologna process with the introduction of the 3 cycles, or if we think back to pre-1989 or 9/11, which is the 9th of November, I think things have changed remarkably. But I have to tell you this, and this is my anecdotes. I know that even within the European space, countries where they do not recognize any form of higher education learning that takes place online. I'm not talking full qualifications. I'm talking about any form of a part of a program that is not on campus but is online, is not recognized under legislation. That's quite scary. I'm also aware of parts or pockets of the European space where a bachelor's degree is not considered a full degree. Why? Because the old system was you had to take 5 years for a first degree and a 5-year degree, a 3-year, the 3 plus 2 plus 3, which is irrelevant, but a 3-year degree is not a degree. So therefore, if you want to be qualified, you have to have a master's degree. And I know this from students who've told me. They are being told this still. I find that really, this is why I say smoke and mirrors. Is it really going on, or are we just pretending that it is? I had another conversation with somebody who said, well, we couldn't recognize so-and-so's, an individual's degree in economics and Mandarin, because in our country we don't have a degree in economics and Mandarin. Is that recognition? Is that a substantial difference for those of you who are really familiar with the Lisbon Convention? And another experience I had, as I said, I'm not a credential evaluator, but I was an employer for a while at a TVET college, a technical college. And I wanted to hire a professor from the US. Now, this professor had graduated in a degree in communication studies from Ohio State in, I think it was like something like 1981, 82. In order for me to get his qualifications approved and therefore apostilled and therefore get a work permit, I had to ask him, this is within an EU country, to have his PhD thesis from 1981 translated. Without that, I couldn't get apostille, I couldn't get approval to hire him and get a work visa in the EU. So I'm saying that, yes, everything's a success. It's remarkable what's happening in Europe. It's far better than anywhere else, for sure. But there are still these, I think, some unspoken legislations, some rules, which are barriers to mobility, are barriers to faculty exchange and students coming in. Oh, that's another thing I heard, was that somebody who wanted to, and this is the lifelong learning aspect, wanted to enroll in a doctoral program in a country in the EU, not Europe, middle age, let's say mid-40s, was required to present their high school A-level, Abitur, baccalaureate diploma. Do you know where your Abitur certificate is? Do you know where your baccalaureate is? I have no idea where mine is. And there's no way that the Cambridge University is going to go looking for mine from 1984. But that was the rule. It still is the rule. So this is not making, whoever it was meant to, Peter Geisler, let's not make it more difficult than it needs to be. Why, at the age of 45, would I carry around with my Abitur certificates? That's insane, if I want to be a lifelong learner. So I will stop there, and that's my, I'll come down off my soapbox. And, oh, I should have showed this before. I'm not going to go into lots of details, but just because we are in Germany, I thought you might be interested in, there are 54 countries in the Europe region. Clearly, you have a lot of international students coming in to Germany. Column 1, China, and we'll come back to that later. Just because in UNESCO's definition we have Europe and North America as a region, I thought it might be useful to separate these two off very quickly. Is it a one-way street? I think you're probably all very well aware of this. Clearly, in terms of mobility and recognition, most of the USA and Canada, I haven't got Canada on here slide, but most of the mobility is inward. and the numbers speak for themselves. I think one of the things that the US has got right, and maybe this is something for other regions of the world to consider, is that most of the recognition decisions, i.e. for access to higher education and therefore for mobility, are at the institutional level. They're very, in my experience, they're very good at looking at applications to further study, or even bachelor's, master's, doctoral studies. They're very good at the institutional level, having that freedom, that flexibility to look at not only the qualifications that may be required, but also to take into account prior learning, as we heard about the recognition of prior learning and experience. And I think that's a very strong point of view. They look at institutions, maybe there are American or North American colleagues in the room who will maybe disagree, but I think they do tend to look more at the person, their motivation statement to study, to apply, rather than you haven't got I can't see your A-levels, I can't see your abitur, so therefore you can't come in. I think they're far more open to that, and I think that's the strength in the US system. Well, that's a typo, not destination nowhere. That shouldn't be right. The number of students from the US studying outside of the US, of course, is far, far smaller. You can see that it should be nowhere unexpected, really, because this is where most of the American, but the numbers are tiny in comparison to the whole system. So in terms of a culture of recognition, a culture of mobility, it's certainly more inward in the US, but they also have a decentralized system. The institutions make that call as to who they would like to be in there, who can succeed as a student. I think that's more the culture, in my understanding. Be careful now, I'm going to talk too much. Now doing my global sweep, I'll try and keep this slightly more concise. In Africa, there is definitely a concern that internationalization, the Addis Convention, the Addis Ababa Convention is the Lisbon Convention for Africa equivalent, that this convention and mobility is really just contributing to brain drain. And again, disclosure, these data may not be absolutely correct, but I think the trend is there. There is, the main reason why there is not so much international mobility of students in Africa, be they either within Africa or outside, is purely social economic. They can't afford it. The number of students in Africa has ballooned beyond belief. Universities are packed, absolutely jam-packed with students. I was in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania earlier this year, and a very well-resourced university, comparatively speaking. I walked into this lecture. The professor was at the front with a microphone, and there must have been I counted 350 students watching this guy, the professor. What I didn't realize until I walked away it was like an opera theatre. This were the stalls. Upstairs, there was another 200. Upstairs from them in the gods, as we call them, was another 100. There was nearly 600 students listening to this professor. And I hear this a lot from the professors and university institutional leaders that say, we've just got no space for any more students. The demand is huge. So the demand is huge for national students. The last thing they can do is accommodate international students. So it's a capacity problem in Africa. It's also socioeconomic. They can't afford to go. I was in China last week, and the University of Johannesburg, the lady there, vice rector for student affairs, said they have students sleeping in the library because they can't afford to sleep. They can't afford to rent anywhere. So when we talk about mobility in Africa, it's very low because they don't have the funds to go. Now, where they do go, clearly, is where there are scholarships available. France, obviously, Francophone Africa, obviously. The USA, of course, South Africa has always been a draw for Anglophone, Southern Africa, English speakers. But even that's now reached capacity. And there's, to some extent, a growing xenophobia, a growing resentment that South African universities can't cope with South African demand, let alone demand from Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, Mozambique. The rest numbers are Germany's there too, but it's all scholarship based. It's not, without the funding they can't go. But this sounds like quite a negative picture, and it really is. But I'll tell you what's a positive element that I've noticed, and I've only been working in Africa for a year. But what I've noticed is a very, very strong desire and practice of recognizing prior learning. Because of economic factors. Many high school graduates, they probably don't even finish high school, but they go on to work somewhere, they go on to work in banks, or somehow they gain experience. And the universities in Southern Africa are far more willing to recognize that Jessica, yes, okay, she didn't quite finish high school because probably she got pregnant, or I don't know, so-and-so had to drop out because he had to look after his brothers and sisters. But they went on to get work, went on to get skills and experiences, and the universities will recognize that, to enroll them down the road when they've got some money, when they can actually afford to go back to university. So I know there was a colleague here from Congo, I think, or DRC, and maybe they can also share their experiences. But this is something that I've seen a very positive trend in Africa, is to recognize that not everybody can go to university just straight out of high school. They can come along later, and I've got many colleagues in my own team who are doing just that. So that's clearly the data is not so surprising, but I think the emphasis is now on providing more spaces at the national level rather than looking internationally. I did have a conversation, or it was a presentation from somebody from the National Commission of Universities in Nigeria. Now, Nigeria, they say, is 1 in 4 people in Africa are from Nigeria because the population is huge. And they have 275 official universities, but that's also a discussion point. But half of those are private institutions. But what he was saying, the problem they have is that every year they have 2 million students, or 2 million high school graduates, wanting a place in higher education. They've only got 500,000 places in these 270 official universities. So they've just launched a new policy, a new program a TNE, a transnational education program, to invite, persuade international universities to come and set up campuses in Nigeria. They want international campuses, they want international universities to provide the space. So in terms of recognition, that's where they are at. We need international universities. We can't cope on our own. And therefore, by definition, of course, they are recognizing foreign qualifications because they're inviting foreign institutions into the country. The Arab states. Now, I use the Arab states here because in UNESCO terms we call it Arab states, but this map is slightly misleading because it also includes the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa. So the Algeria, Morocco, Libya, Tunisia, Mauritania. So it's kind of a bit of a misleading map. And I've said here recognition of qualifications for imported skills because, I'll come back to that, because in terms of the mobility from the Arab region, I think it probably falls into three categories. First of all, you've got the MENA, the Francophone countries, Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritania, Algeria. They have a mobility direction towards France, which is fine, which is normal and expected. You don't get much mobility from sub-Saharan Africa, Francophone, to France because of the financial constraints. The other part you have is, let's say, the Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, traditionally mobile within that region, very much focused on going to international universities within that space. American University of Cairo, American University of Beirut is long established. Maybe in more recent times, the American University of Sharjah and in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. So there's always been that kind of cluster of mobility within that part. In more recent times, you have a lot of mobility within the GCC, the Gulf countries, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and by extension Saudi. But less so within that region, but externally. There's been a lot of mobility push outside of the GCC, the Gulf countries, to study abroad. Probably in Germany, I don't have the stats for that, but certainly the UK, English speaking, UK, USA, Canada. And it's really all been based on ability to pay, frankly. There may be scholarships offered by the receiving countries, but oftentimes the scholarships come from the governments in that region. I grew up in a town in the UK called Lincoln, which didn't have a university until about 1995. So it's one of these new universities, and it's flooded with students able to pay from the Gulf states predominantly. And I remember about 10 years ago, UNESCO was approached by Qatar via the Carnegie Foundation, and they wanted to know what would UNESCO recommend as the top 100 universities, because they only wanted to provide foundations to scholarships to students from Qatar in these top 100. And of course, that's not our job. We weren't able to provide that information. Other people can do that, and then you know all the rankings as much as I do. But it really was, I think that's the third dimension. I also think from my own experience, and this is not necessarily anecdotal because it's actually true, that in certain parts of the Gulf countries, the Middle East countries, there was a distinct skills shortage. And they were importing a lot of overseas workers. So this is not necessarily academic recognition, this is recognition for the labour market. So the United Arab Emirates, for example, I think the current population is hovering around 10 million, of which 10% are Emiratis. That's, of 10 million, 9 million people come from overseas to work in that country. You're probably all aware of this. And there was a time, certainly in the late 90s, going into the noughties, where everybody could go and work there. But I do know that the authorities there, the recognition authorities, have clamped down on this and started now to look far more carefully, not only in the Emirates, but also in Bahrain, in Qatar and Kuwait, on what sort of qualifications people have. I mean, it was a joke when I lived in the Middle East for a while. It was a joke then that you could get on the plane at Heathrow, London, a plumber. You could get off the plane in Dubai as an engineer. And that was the case. And they've tightened up significantly on that, particularly for the regulated professions, teachers, doctors, lawyers, architects, engineers, etc. But I also think there's the circulation within the region is not quite as, the mobility is not as strong as it should. I think they're still looking to Europe, North America, Australia, rather than promoting a culture of recognition and mobility within the region, to a certain extent. This is my sense. Just by way of example, there you go. Number of students from Saudi Arabia studying overseas, number of students studying in Saudi, that we don't have. But it's also, there's a linguistic barrier there. Of course, you have to have programs offered in English or French or other language. And there are. I was at Prince Sultan University back in October, and they have a number of programs offered in English and French, but not significant enough to attract huge numbers of students. Latin America. I do hope there's nobody from Latin America in the room, because you probably don't want to read that book. I am by no means an expert on Latin America and the Caribbean. In UNESCO, we lump them together, Latin America and the Caribbean, but really they're very different entities. I'll show you some stats here. There we go. Inbound students from Latin America are hardly surprising. My first experience really with Latin America was when we were developing, working on drafting the new Buenos Aires Convention, which was to enhance mobility within Latin America and the Caribbean. And I was genuinely quite shocked at the resistance to most of the countries there, that why would we need to be having mobile students from other countries? Why would we do that? Why would we do? And it was a very difficult sell. I do remember, it's not for UNESCO to tell a region what they should be doing. We're trying to help you. If you would like to have exchange of students and faculty and mobility within your region, then this is what the convention can help you with. It really wasn't easy for them. They weren't that convinced by it. They were very concerned that there would be the convention, and ultimately the global convention would mean that everybody would come into their country and start taking their jobs or taking the student places or changing curricula, neo-colonialism. I remember a professor from representing Argentina at the drafting committee said, well, we can't, the only way you can come and study in Argentina is if you've taken 2 years of Argentinian history. Well, in that case, that's nobody, is it? Because there's nobody outside of Argentina takes Abitur History Argentina. And, well, yeah, no, probably not. My boss, her daughter is an artist, and she studied in Uruguay, and she had to take, as part of her master's program, she's from Mozambique, she had to take 2 years, a 2-year course on Uruguay history, and pass that exam in order to graduate from a master's degree in, I think it was some sort of art history, from University of Montevideo. Why on earth would you do that? So I think things are changing. There are lots of very diverse groups within Latin America. You have your Mercosur, you have Grupo Alba, you have OEA, and they're not really speaking to each other. There's geopolitics going on a little bit. But the final thing I might say, again, it's just recalling an experience. I had a colleague working with me from Brazil, super smart. She took her master's in Brazil. She came to France, took her doctorate degree at the Sorbonne, and when she went back to take that to Brazil, they wouldn't recognize it. I'll just leave that as a question mark. You can ask yourself why it was. I think I know why, but there is not that culture of how, and she wanted to go back to Brazil. She wanted to become an academic and take her studies back and become a teacher at University of Brazil, but she wasn't given that opportunity. So there's underlying currents, biases, and in the region. That said, there are a lot of exchange students coming between Spain and Latin America, Spanish speaking. Of course, Portugal, the Lusophone, and Brazil, but also supported by foundations such as the Bank Santander, La Caixa. They're the ones providing the funding to make this mobility move. I know you're going to tell me to shut up now, aren't you? All right, I'll be very quick now. You know, I was looking for a map for Asia Pacific, and you know they always have this Asia Pacific tigers and whatever you call it, lions. Who knew? There's a celebration of bats in Asia Pacific cultures. So anyway, that's got absolutely nothing to do with recognition, but I just thought it was quite interesting that it's a more, rather than a regular map. Inbound students from Asia Pacific, again, not so surprising. A lot of students going to Australia for obvious reasons, a lot coming to the UK, a lot going to the USA. 35% of the world's student population are in India and China, 35%. The Indian Open University has got 2 million students enrolled. Now, anybody who's in a university admissions officer, you imagine being the admissions officer for 2 million students. In China, I just heard last week, it's called Xianzhong Liverpool University, joint venture, just celebrating 15 years. They started in 2007 or 8 with 172 students. They've now got 24,000. Half of which are international students. That's in Xi'an, in China. So things are changing in China. We've got lots of data of Chinese students going abroad. We've got lots of data on them. We've got no real data of students coming in to study in China, but that's changing. And I saw pictures of this Liverpool Xi'an University, and it looked like, if you've ever seen Apple headquarters, that great big circle thing, it looks like that. It's extraordinary. But it's not only China. Vietnam, again, flashpoint of the number of students from Southeast Asia going outside of the region. They are becoming more mobile. And they've also got, give me 2 minutes, in the Asia-Pacific region particularly, beginning to look a lot more similar to Europe region. You know, we've got this ASEAN mobility program, we've got the SAMIO one, we also have the Asia-Pacific network, the APNIC, which is a UNESCO network for the Tokyo Convention, very similar to the ENIC-NARIC, where information is there. They are beginning to be more on the move than probably anywhere else, because they've got frankly, they've got the financial backup, like Erasmus. It's not Erasmus, but it's something similar. Depending on where you are, depending on where you look at, this is back to my parallax, depends on what you look at, whether you see mobility as a good thing or a bad thing or a barrier or a change. It really does depend on how you look at things. Thank you for listening, and for the geeks in the room, you know who you are. Thank you.
We have time for... thank you. Even though you took all your time, I think we will... I think we have time for two questions, quick questions to Peter Wells. I'm sure there are many, but we have to limit it to two. Who has a question to Peter Wells? Yes, please go ahead. Short question, short answer.
Sure.
Thank you. Helene Peterbauer from the European University Association. When you showed the list of signature countries of the Global Recognition Convention, and you're talking a lot about lopsided mobility flows and developments, when you look at the list of signature countries, there's a lot of European there. And I know it will probably depend on the perspective, but what's your perspective? Is this a good thing in that it shows like some frontrunners and popular destinations joining in the global convention? Is it a bad thing because it's just not a European club, or is it nothing at all yet and it's still a very young convention?
Thank you.
Yeah, clearly it's a global convention. We do not, speaking for UNESCO, we don't want it to be perceived as an extension of Lisbon Convention, for example, which is just all Europeans or predominantly Europeans. I think, so that is certainly not the intention, otherwise it's almost by definition defunct. It's global by definition, it has to be global by implementation. Slowly but surely, we are seeing more countries join. It's very difficult to predict who will join, but one of the key things that we face, and my colleague Andreas is in the room too, he knows very well about this, is trying to demystify what it means. That this is not about automatic recognition, it's not about guaranteeing people access to higher education in any individual member state, it's not about allowing refugees to come and access the labour market. We have a lot of good PR to do, but we are slowly but surely getting there, and we rely on the states parties that I put there to make that message get out there too. Thank you.
One more short question, one more short answer, if there is any question right now. I'm sure, yeah. Grace.
Thanks a million. Just on the process of getting of countries joining the Global Recognition Convention, is that something that like UNESCO kind of actively go out there and sort of bang a drum about, or is it sort of here you go and opt in if you like?
No, it definitely is UNESCO's role to speak to all 194 member states and advocate continuously. This is what the benefit would be to you, your country, your institutions, your higher education system. The benefits to you would be X, Y, Z. And for whenever we can, that's what we promote. But at the end of the day, it's not something that we can twist arms. It has to be like any convention, UN convention. You want to join the cultural convention, well, you have to present your reason why you would like to do it. We can say why it would be good for you, for your higher education system, your universities, and that's our role. But ultimately, we can't insist.
And I know this is a very quick follow-up. I know it's hard to predict, and kind of picking up on Helena's point about there's a lot of European countries in there already. Mm-hmm. You know, if you had to kind of guesstimate a time frame for maybe a more representative, you know, more representation from globally, what would you say that would look like?
I would like to say we're at 24. Did I say 24 or 25 at the end of 23? Let's say we were at 25. I would like to say within 5 years we'd have 50.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter Wells.